Well, good morning, viewers. I'll be talking softly to you this morning because I have a sore throat. I am a victim to a sore throat. And Pat McGart, I know, is nearly as good in conversing, but we'll have to rely on him today. Needs must. Are you accepting
Yes.
this solemn
There's,
obligation
uh,
that's been placed on your broad shoulders, Pat?
hey, by the way, you typical Collins. How did you get a cold in the middle of the warmest days of the year?
I know, because I'm perverse. Some would say
Uh,
perverted, but perverse, I'll say.
I
Anyway,
say,
I might
the
sound
best weather
awful.
we've had
I might
in
sound
what in
awful, but
about
I'm really in good form. Okay,
right. Okay, where you
let's
go.
get at them. You remarked on this that Leo Varadkar has been much more outspoken on the question of a border poll since he left office, and you have some evidence of it happening recently. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, it was in Philadelphia did that Ireland's future thing, and he made a remarkable speech. Mark Hennessy in the Irish Times has a big thing on it today. And basically, Leo said, remember we were chatting about it before? No, but find out, right? Let's start from the start. Leo is a member, or was a member of Fine Gael. He was Taoiseach. Fine Gael were known in my younger days as the West Brit Party. They were all the doctors, the lawyers, and all
Yeah.
that sort of party. They were, whereas Fianna Fáil were allegedly the party of the working class, like the Labour Party and so on, so on.
Mm.
And a lot of the old Labour guys were Protestant farmers from the border counties and so on and all that. So their sort of gene pool was from all that sort of the sort of adopting the cap to the Brits and all that sort of stuff. So what I find really remarkable is Leo Varadkar was Taoiseach, and during his time as Taoiseach, he wasn't, not to my knowledge, maybe you can contradict me, that way inclined at all. But since he has stepped down from office, he has become remarkably outspoken in regard to this whole thing about Irish unity. Now, Jude, I have a simple theory here, and I'll run it by you, and you can see what you
Okay.
think. I think his dealings during the Brexit era,
Mm.
some way, sort of heightened his with him on dealing with the Brits is not the way to go. I think something happened. I think he went in, middle of the road and came out the other end, far more down the road as towards support for Irish unity. And
Yeah.
I think Brexit is what changed his whole persona,
Uh,
dealing with the arrogance and the sort of what would you say of the likes of Boris Johnson and David Frost and people like that.
I put your finger
What's
on it, I think, Pat. I think that's what happened, all right. I think he discovered that, you don't have to kowtow to the Brits and that they're also very unreasonable when you try to deal with them. Um, don't forget his party, as well as being the West Brit Party and blue shirts and all that, is also the party of Michael Collins. That's Michael Collins' party, really. And I remember being in the office of Enda Kenny, and there's a huge, I'm sure still there, a huge oil painting of Michael Collins in his military uniform, the
yeah,
cap
yeah.
and the gloves and so on. And I remember thinking at the time, geez, there's Enda all the time saying, oh, no, the answer is not violence. Jesus,
Yeah.
I tell you,
Uh,
Michael
do,
Collins.
do you know there's a lot of hypocrisy not to digress from it, like Michael Martin, all those guys about the IRA and all the rest of it. Michael Collins has idolized this thing by who basically brought freedom to to the South, let's call it, you know, and yet like he was the archetypal terrorist. He
Yeah.
actually, what he just what
He
the
invented
Gullah
it.
War that he invented it. There's really what he called a Monacan begging. His nom de guerre during the war was Michael because he was a big fan of Michael Collins. But that's to say this. But getting back to do you are you accepting the fact that maybe Leo's journey during Brexit had changed his stance in
I,
regard to
I,
doing?
I think yes, and I think the sort of acclaim he was greeted with for being as firm as he was and for solving problems that no other people had solved. I think that gave him heart, and he realized this was something that people responded to. But yeah, it's complicated because after that he left the Dáil. And it's
Yeah.
really since he left the Dáil that he has begun speaking out explicitly on the notion of a border poll in a united Ireland. So if you were a cynic, you could say, oh, well, he's now talking out when he no seats at risk or anything. And what does he care about Fine Gael now? he's on his own. Or you could say that he has learnt as he went along and realizes that this makes sense. I'd
Yeah.
like to think it was
But
the
then he said,
second.
yeah, he says Irish unity should no longer be an aspiration; it should be an objective. And
Mm.
what
That's
he
the
said
second
there,
time,
but he,
Pat. Pat, that's the second
uh,
time he's used those exact words. He
yeah,
said that.
but
Those
you
are,
know, he says one thing he learned during Brexit was that the Brits don't. He says don't often pay a lot of attention to Ireland, what's happening either north or south. Just in case somebody in Belfast thinks, we're treated very seriously. But Leo says the Brits take their eye off the ball when it comes to Ireland, either place. But he says they are always got their eye on to what's happening in the White House. And he
mm.
says America has, and hey, Judy, he made a couple of great points. He says, Ireland has always been part of America, but America has always been part of Ireland in a strange sort of way. De Valera went to America and absolutely massive crowds. He raised 5 million was it quid back then or way back in the 1920s in the late 1990 teens. For Irish independence and all the rest of it. So there's a what would you say a gene pool of goodwill there.
Well, there is, but I think there's if you're talking about Irish America, I've always thought, and Leo would say it too, of course, that it's a very important constituency, right from the foundation of, well, even before the foundation of the Northern State. Irish American opinion and support has been very important. But if you think about the Good Friday Agreement, it wasn't just bunches of people in America that achieved that. It was the Biden or the Clinton administration. It was the
Yeah,
guy in the White House, as you say. We don't have a
yeah.
guy in the White House now. Biden would have, I think there's possibilities with him. We, Trump could give two damns about us. He couldn't care less. So
Doesn't give
there's
two
no
damns
strength
about Trump
there.
either,
You're only
Judy.
going to
He
get
doesn't give. Uh,
you're only going to get, if you're going to get support from Irish America, it's only going to be at the civic level.
uh, but Trump doesn't give monkeys about anybody other than I'd say himself and his coterie of friends and family. Uh, but I thought what Leo says, what he's basically trying to do, Jude, is get Irish America involved again. And I wrote it down. He says it's great to be here in the gathering of the Friends of Ireland and as dreamers and architects of its future. So he sort of, yeah, that's what I was nice. Dreamers and architects of its future. Jude, he says that year by year, the numbers in the north who are in favour of unity are growing. The number of young people, particularly, Jude, know what it is. I think the nice middle class, I call them the Castle Catholics, the ones that are in their 50s and 60s now,
Yeah.
who this last while they've almost become describing themselves as Northern Irish, and so on. But the younger people, I think there's a lot of younger people, Derry and places, they see themselves as Irish. They don't see themselves as Northern Irish. And I think a lot, Jude, the other way, I look at now a lot of young people go to Belfast, go to university there. There's a lot of, I've watched programs on TG Car, a lot of, Jude, I'm going to end up on this, but the number of people from the north now who can speak Irish, I think far surpasses the number down south who can speak
Uh,
Irish.
you're right. I think you're absolutely right. There's something has happened there. And I think one of the most hopeful signs was kneecap. Simple as
Yeah,
that. It's that outright. We owe no debt to anybody in the past. This is what we like. We like doing this. We
yeah,
like saying fuck. We like jumping around. We like
yeah,
saying ooh ah up the rah. And if you don't like it, you can stick it up your jumper. So
yeah,
it's that kind of independence of thought and that thought which is listing towards, of course, Ireland should be united. It's ridiculous. I think
yeah,
that's the way they think. I could be wrong now.
yeah,
And there's also in the south quite a few. I was very surprised. I remember talking to a young guy, it must be 10 years ago now, and saying to him, "So would you vote?" He had a very respectable job. I said, "Who would you vote for uh, if you had the opportunity in the next election?" He says, "Oh, I'd vote Sinn Féin, of course." I
yeah.
said, would you be an outlier then, or would your colleagues, maybe they worked for a bank or something? And I said, oh, yeah. And I'd say about 90% of them would be voting for
Yeah,
Sinn. So it's
yeah,
that kind of thinking. I'm not, I think Leo, it's good to see Leo saying these things, but it remains at the civic level and it remains very general. I wish to
yeah.
God we could get it onto the sort of the official political platform. I'd rather, let's put it like this, I'd rather see Leo when he was in office in Philadelphia
Yeah.
saying that than I would him doing it after he left.
But anyway, okay, I take your point. But the other side of the story, at least he's influential. He's a former
Hmm.
leader, former Taoiseach, and he's saying these things. And he's made the same point that we've made numerous occasions. And Jude, I was in Australia in 1999 when John Howard deliberately set the wrong question about the Republic. He said basically he gives them an option that a president would be like the chief executive in this. Australians didn't want that. Leo says if there's going to be a United Ireland, we need to get it right. We don't need to do a Brexit. We don't need to do Scottish independence. We don't need, the Australian Republican vote. He says we need to get it right, and he says basically, we should sit down and work it all out. We've said that a million times, dude. You're only going to get one shot at this because if you mess it up, it's probably gone for a generation.
They make this, I think Irish Times made that point in one of his editorials recently. But
Uh,
the thing is this, Pat, I still get impatient. I mean, I'm delighted Varadkar spoke out. I'm delighted you have this Ireland's future organization. But I get a bit impatient. I would give my right arm. No, I wouldn't. I'd give your right arm. If somebody would say, I'm in favor of United Ireland, and here's the first step I believe we must take inside the next 6 months. Now, I don't know what that would be, but for
yeah,
God's sake, let's get it down to brass tacks and
yeah,
saying what
yeah,
step are we going to take? It's sort of the respectable version. I hate to say this, but I think it's a sort of a respectable version of guys in a boozer when they've had a few pints and singing the broad black brimmer. You know,
sure,
I'd
yeah,
say you
yeah,
feel good, but it doesn't mean a damn thing. So I really do. I wish there was some way that the Southern government could be pressurized or persuaded that they should start getting concrete. Get concrete. I think that should be our watchword. Get concrete with
yeah,
it.
yeah. I, what is it Leo said? We shouldn't be denying our differences, but we should seek to embrace them, and I know, and all the rest of it.
Mhm.
Should quite willing to sit down and have a look at things like the national anthem, the flag, everything else. I'm not willing to sort of just throw everything away, but I'm saying see what's reasonable and see what's doable,
Mm.
and all the rest of it. But this whole thing that Micheál Martin, Jude. I know, I always think the irony of it, Fianna Fáil, the Republican Party, they're the least Republican Party under Micheál Martin you could possibly come across. And this shared Ireland thing, Judy, if they wait till every unionist agrees to United Ireland, Jude, somewhere about 2000 and what 2500 and whatever it would be, we might eventually get there, but not a hope in hell my lifetime or yours.
I do. I think it's time. I'm delighted, like you are, with Varadkar coming out and saying that. I just wish that people would, especially the people who are putting all that time and energy and money into organising Ireland's future events. I mean, those don't come cheap. I would like to see them laying out a timetable of what they're going to look at and what they're going to try to resolve one by one by one by one.
Yeah,
Make it
absolutely.
Make it concrete. So you'll know that.
Yeah.
Never mind MAGA. Make it
Yeah.
concrete. Mick. Mick. That's my watchword.
What the bother?
Okay, let's go to the most important person in the world and the most handsome person in the world and the brightest deal maker in the world, maybe the
Yeah.
universe. I refer to none other than our friend, of course, Trump. Um, Here's the thing. Why do you think the stock market went down and then up? It was like a rubber ball. It hit the bottom and then boom, it went flying up. I think Apple or something like that gained 9% in one day. Overall, the stock market made an upward surge of $304 billion.
Mm.
$304 billion. And that's in one day. Now, have you anything comment to make on that, Pat?
Dude, well, someone I would love to know. Well, you see, the stock market lost 7 trillion, so it hasn't gone up all that much. In fact, it's still in flux. But here's the thing, Jude. I saw last night two Democratic, Adam Kinzinger, I think is one of them, is calling for an investigation. They find out just how many people in Trump's circle have they bought shares, because he says it looks like to him insider trading. If they knew beforehand that Trump was going to announce all this thing and then announce about 4 days later that he was going to pause them for 90 days, that all his people got in and bought shares when they were at rock bottom, and then they claimed, Jude, there's two things. Either Trump is a crook or he is incompetent, but it's one or the other. Because if he introduced these tariffs and they were nothing going to change, and then suddenly the shit fell out of the market and all the rest, and he started to panic, that's incompetence. Or if he knew what he was going to do, and the other one, it's insider trading, which is criminal action. In other words, his friends. Actually, there's a thing in the White House, Jude. It's on social media. I don't know whether it's AI generated or something, but he looked at one guy. You made about 2 billion, in 3 days. Now, Jude, I
Yeah.
don't know if that's true or not. Like, well, it is. It's like it's Al Capone in the White House. That's really what it is. But anyway, Jude, the whole thing is that it's the bond markets apparently that made the big difference. If apparently Japan, while apparently being supplicant to Trump and so on, it was quietly trying to sell off US bonds. And apparently, which means they have no confidence in the American market. And when that happens, interest rates go way up. So that means Americans who have mortgages, their rates are going to go up. The people who have loans are going to go up. Your car, your student loan, everything's going, and that scares the shit out of the big guys, because everything then their money starts going down. So apparently, this is and who else? The Chinese. They are the Americans. They have more American debt than anybody else, and if they start floating American bonds on the stock exchange or on the markets, apparently they could do serious damage.
Hmm. I think that you said, was it that Trump knew what he was doing and, allowed these guys to make this money and that's why he did it? Or was he incompetent and didn't know what he was doing? I think it could be both. He could be incompetent and guys wouldn't need to be insider information. They are insiders and they'd look at the thing and they'd say, what's going to happen next? He'd fucking almost certainly put the bloody thing up again. And guys was shoveling. I would, well, we're told 304 billion was made
Yeah,
in
yeah,
that 1 day period. So if you're
yeah.
into the stock market, you know about these things. And if you're close to Trump, you'd get a sense of where the bugger's going to wind up. And you'd see this
Yeah.
is going to be really nice killing for us. Uh,
Yeah, but isn't it unbelievable that somebody of that a narcissistic ignoramus is sitting in the White House? There's a guy goes to a Republican function and in front of the world says they're kissing my ass, saying, please, sir." What sort of a fucking gobshite is that? You sort of say he's disgusting human being. He thinks, what is he like? Charles Dickens, can I have more, sir? And everybody calling him sir. And by the way, do you ever notice, Judah? I think it's deliberate. So almost, remember, was it any reference to the woman who did Hitler? You ever notice Trump when he's sitting in the Oval Office? He's sitting down, and all the people are standing. All the supplicants, the trade minister and all the rest of it are all standing. So, in other words, he is the only guy with the power in the room, and it's deliberate. And by the way, he always wears the blue suit. So the guy must be told, "Don't you wear any like that?" And you sort of go, "This is like some sort of image that he's sending out that he
Choreography.
is." But by the way, let me make one point. There was the guy from Trade whose name escapes me totally. Was in Congress chatting to the Democrats when he was taught the rug was pulled in front of him. He didn't know that Trump was going to announce that the suspension or the pause of the tariffs for 90 days. And one of the Democrat guys said he found out, and he's, "Do you know, Mr. Trade Secretary, whoever his name is, that the president has just basically announced their name?" No, I don't. Like, in other words, the guy who was supposed to be the trade secretary hadn't a clue. So, in other words, He's not a trade secretary. Trump makes the decisions.
He's a puppet. Yeah, I agree.
He's a puppet, yeah.
There's two points I would make there, and one of them is that I was listening to Joe Brawley's podcast the other day. Not nearly as good as us. There's no question, no comparison. Pat, we're streets ahead. But he made the point. He said, "I would rather," and he's talking about these reality shows. He says, I would have no problem swallowing those insects. I'd have no problem getting into a vat filled with these eels or snakes or whatever. I would eat cockroaches, no problem. But if I had to kiss Trump's ass, I would throw up.
Yeah, I agree.
I
But
thought that
you
was
know that here's the point too. Hey, there's what about 450 million people in the EU. There's what 300 and something million in there's about more than 100 million people. Europe's the biggest market in the world. Now,
stop.
Jude, we can
I
do
was very
serious.
sick.
We
Did you
can do.
know that? It was in papers. Did you know that comparison of
I,
population?
well, I remember the American was about 300 million, and I remember. By the way, I thought Europe was about 500 million, but it's a wee bit less.
Yeah, I didn't
So
know
there's
that.
about 108. I think 108 million difference, right? That's the first thing. You know, Canada has already swiped a massive amount of American goods off its shelf. Uh, Canadian trips across the border, according to the Irish Times, are down almost 50% in certain places, down certainly 45%. They're not booking holidays in America, etc., etc. Now, Jude, if Canada, Mexico, the EU, a lot of South American countries, and all the rest started acting in concert, even to a degree, apparently, van der Leyen had a very long conversation with the Chinese leader or deputy leader earlier this week. Jude, there are other markets. The Chinese are not trying to screw Europe. The South Americans are not trying to screw Europe. Canada's not trying to screw Europe. Mexico's not trying to. There's one country trying to screw Europe, and that's the Americans.
Yeah, the thing, of course, is, and several people made this comment, I think, yesterday, that whatever you might think about civil rights or citizens' rights in China, the one thing you can depend on is they're going to be a stable market.
Yeah.
The very opposite applies with regard to Trump. Although we'll come to that later on, whether or not civil rights are being observed in the US, but
Yeah.
it's the very opposite of stable. And I mean, you don't have to have a degree in business to know that if there's an unstable situation, it's not a good idea to start putting your money into it, except you know
Aye.
some other people don't know.
There was a guy on Channel 4 last night on the news. I sat and watched it. Dude, I'm really getting the stage. I'm stopping watching because it's really depressing.
Yeah.
It's like watching Gaza. But anyway, he's an interpreter, but he's also a former minister with the Xi, or what do we call the guy? The big chief in China.
I,
And he was on last night in Channel 4. He was absolutely superb.
I saw him
You know
passing
the
the
point
plane.
you're after making there. He said the guy tried to say, well, at least America's not, or China's not a democracy, but he says, yeah, we're stable. He says he says we plan for he says something like 100 years ahead. So in other words, if you were in a business event right now, and you had the opportunity, though I'm not saying China offers a lot of opportunity, but if you're a businessman and you had 100 billion or whatever it would be to spend on a big project, and China says come here, or American says come here, or whatever, which would you go to? When when you make a deal, it's going to be listened to, observed, and the other one, was it Trump? Maybe up today, down tomorrow. Maybe you're screwed tariffs the next day and whatever. Which one are you going to go with?
Of course, you choose China. I actually, if you start, I thought that guy was very interesting, and I find myself saying, I'm beginning to like the Chinese more than I like Americans.
Yeah,
He said something about he called us peasants. He referred to the Chinese
yeah,
Trump
yeah,
as peasants, and he said, "I'm proud to be a peasant. My father was a peasant.
yeah.
We have been a country and a civilization for 5,000 years."
Yeah. By
What
the way, that was JD Vance referred to them as that
a,
it was
what
ridiculous
a,
that
what a
American
piece of
were owed Chinese peasants so much money.
Oh God! I mean, isn't it? I did a list of. I can't understand that guy Vance at all. I did a list of the things that Vance said about Trump before
Yeah.
he was converted. God, he said so many bad things about him.
Yeah.
I mean, but they're all perfectly credible. You can see how it made sense. But then he just flips over and talks. brazenly, like
But you,
Trump.
that does not raise massive questions about Vance's character.
Oh yeah, absolutely. He's just like his master. He'll say one thing and then he say the other thing, and he won't be remotely ashamed of the difference between the two statements. And
Jude, look, son, America is becoming increasingly, like you can be. Apparently, the people were turned away there because they had some sort of meme about Trump. You can be arbitrarily deported. They've still got the death penalty. What do you call it? There's shootings, I think, twice a day there. Jude, and see that the people can be left on the street by ICE, and so on. Jude, there's a horrible society evolving in America. And by the way, in places like Columbia University, if you speak out against Israel, you can be deported. Your career can be over. Like there was what's the dean of journalism? I think it was Columbia University. A student asked him about speaking out. He says, "Don't. It's a dangerous thing. There's nobody can protect you." Imagine a dean of journalism telling a young person not to speak out in America, the
oh,
land of the free.
it's appalling. It's appalling. 50 universities were written
Yeah.
to by Trump's administration, warning them that they would be defunded if there was any sign of activity which might make a minority feel at risk.
In other words, you
Code,
can't have a
code.
go at Israel.
Exactly. Code for that.
Uh,
And another thing, like this thing, I did a Anti-Town News column on it, and they included the little bit of film that was taken about the woman who was approached by these five men playing.
with no jackets, no identification, an unmarked car, unmarked van.
She was taken away. I don't know what has become of that woman. Do you?
No, no.
Uh, Stephen Levitsky, a Harvard political science professor, who's organized or who co-authored a book called How Democracies Die. He says this is what authoritarians do. They go after civil society. And it's true. It's true.
Yeah.
The universities they're going after them like nobody's business. Individuals who they think are not the way they'd like them to be. Like there was this case of this guy, I made a note of it. 29-year-old Salvadorian, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, has now
Uh,
joined the burgeoning, they say, population in El Salvador's confinement center, i.e., prison. This guy was a U.S.
it's more
citizen.
like a concentration camp, Jude. They're not
Yeah,
properly fed. They're beaten up
he
regularly.
was.
It's a horrific place.
Yeah, he was married to a U.S. Citizen. He was a father of a 5-year-old autistic child. He arrived in the U.S. more than 10 years ago, fleeing from gang violence, and now he's in this prison in El Salvador. And the Trump administration has made some noises that, oh well, that was my mistake, a sort of a clerical error, and they didn't do a thing about it.
The judge apparently said a rule that he should be come back. Trump's people come out with a sort of a comedy response. Tell that to the president of El Salvador. Others,
Uh,
they're saying we have no authority over in El Salvador. In other words, there was another example, Jude, of someone sent off. Apparently, the courts ruled that the person shouldn't be. The solicitor lawyer for the person who was being deported said she tried to get to the FBI. She said she was deliberately obstructed by FBI officers to ensure that the person was on a plane and out of the country before she was allowed to get it. So, in other words, they told basically the courts bugger off. In other words, Trump's people are saying they're above the law.
it's hard to know what way things are going because some of the reports I read were saying that, the universities have caved in. Like Harvard has, taken steps to see that no student engages in protest of any kind. Colombia, even. Because they've been penalized, by Colombia, I think, had 400 million taken away from it.
Yeah.
And other universities are threatened with it or else it's taken from them. And so many of them have caved in. And then you hear, as I say, people like J.D. Vance, who at one time could see through Trump, apparently can't see through him anymore. And you get the point where you say, he's won. He's won. There's nobody else
Yeah.
left. But I take heart from this. I listen to podcasts and you read the old thing. Well, I'm not the New York Times, but I can sometimes get the little beginning bits. But there's a lot of quite smart people, and they don't mind putting the boot, Americans I'm talking about, and they
Yeah,
don't mind putting the boot into Trump and denouncing him for what he is. And I quoted that guy that said, the professor, who said, that this is the way authoritarian people act. They act on civic society, and in other words, he's denouncing Trump for what he is. And I'd say there has to be enough American people and institutions.
there's a guy on TV called John Stewart. He's sort of a
Oh, I
political.
know him. I know him good.
Jude, he is, I would say, he is easily the most effective opposition to Trump. Not anybody in the Democratic Party, not anybody in the print media, not any university lecturer or anybody else. John Stewart, a political comedian, he is destroying Trump nightly, and I think he's hopefully his audience is growing that because I think a lot of people are flocking to him to see what he's saying. But he has taken the piss out of Trump, and by the way, what I mean, he has taken the piss out of him in a way that it's absolutely uh, sort of holds up to ridicule some of the things Trump has said, and know all the inconsistencies and so on. I am the stable genius. I am all the rest. He
Yeah.
just it absolutely destroys him.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. John Stewart is absolutely, that's the name, yeah, Stewart. He's absolutely brilliant, but he's not the only one. You have
Yeah,
guys like Stephen Colbert on
yeah,
Saturday Night Live, and there's quite a number of them. And once you
yeah,
go into the podcast, there's guys who write for the New York Times, like Ezra Klein, who's about in
yeah,
his, I guess, early 40s, and a whole range of people like that who, I worry for them, to be honest. I worry for
yeah.
them. They're so
By the way, can I
outspoken.
change the subject a wee? But there was a thing done, and I must go and look for it again. They sent out this report, I think it was ABC, and they start deliberately and for a Vox Pop, and they interviewed people, and they said the Republicans have broken into the Democratic headquarters. Do you agree with? Oh yeah, that's okay. I have no problem. Dude, they deliberately mixed up Richard Nixon and a whole lot of other things. And do you agree with the war in Vietnam? Yeah, it's okay. Dude, this is about 2 weeks ago. These are Trump supporters. This is how fucking dumb they are, you know. And you sort of go, wait a minute, is this taking the piss? And this is real, apparently. You know, they deliberately they went to a Trump rally and asked these people about a whole, and they threw in all these sort of historical anomalies, you know, into the conversation, and nobody copped on what they're being asked. Even the Vietnam War, Jude.
Well, I just shows you the strength of personality. If you've got a guy who's got charisma, and the truth of the matter is that Trump has charisma, and they're under his spell, he can nearly do anything. As he said, he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and nobody would bat an eyelid. So when you're that kind of leader around, there are people who would follow him to the death. It wouldn't matter what he did or what he said,
Yeah.
which is really not what you want.
There
But
was
I
there was
still
one guy on there on as well. He said someone President Trump is the only man on earth who could negotiate this sort of deal. That's going, Jesus Christ. You know, are you for real? The only man on earth, you know, like as he's some sun god, you know, coming down or what?
I think he's making a mistake because I think a lot of people who, like in the EU, who felt that they had no choice but to be in good terms with them, are now looking around and saying, well, yeah, we'd still like to have a deal, proper relationships with the US, but there are others like China and, other markets like Australia, like
Yeah.
Africa.
But
I think that in the end will be a good thing because
yeah,
sometimes good things come about because people are pressured out of a bad situation.
yeah. Tony Connolly, I regard as probably the best reporter
Well, it's
on
from Derry.
RT.
That's why you're saying that.
But it's also true. Tony was on yesterday. Like Tony, I don't know. Tony seems to have insight. Even BBC, I always noticed during Brexit, BBC used to get Tony on regularly because he had insider information. I don't know what his sources are, but anyway, he came out yesterday and he says, "Know what we've learned?" And he says it's going to be very interesting. See when the bond markets moved, Trump moved because he was basically, to use that colloquial term, shitting himself, right? You know, he says we now know what works, and Europe knows, China knows, Japan knows. So, Jude, maybe the arrogance, see if they start selling off American bonds and the whole economic system starts to shiver. Okay, hey, Trump 90-day pause, but there's still 10% on all goods, and there's what is it, 25% on cars, aluminium, and whatever else, steel, and so on. But Jude, the arrogance might be knocked off of you because now everybody knows this is where they're vulnerable.
Was it James Carville? I'm not even sure who James Carville is. Was he? He's a
He
Democrat
was uh, Clinton's
advisor.
director of elections.
Aye, aye. And he said that when he came back, if he had a second existence, he'd like to be the president of the United States. And now he says he doesn't want to be president anymore in the next life. He says in the next life he'd like to be the bond market because clearly
Right.
the bond market is
That's
far
where the
more
power
powerful,
is. Yeah,
which is rather
absolutely.
clever.
Uh,
Any local stuff we want you
Good,
to?
you're funny. We were just chatting about there was a thing. I read it in the Dairy Journal this morning on their website. There's a girl from Claudy. She's 26, and she had a media degree, a film and video, and someone else. They were asking why so many people are emigrating from Ireland, and she said she is now, know them super trucks you see in the Kimberley mines. Do you know the size of a three-story building type thing? You know those huge trucks where the wheels, if you put a human being beside them, the wheels go way up above their heads. She's driving one of them, and she says she can earn in 2 weeks in the Kimberley mines, which are outside of Perth, well, far outside of Perth, But anyway, in 2 weeks, what she could earn in 2 months at home. And she says that, and Jude, I think you might have sent it on to me. I don't remember who sent it on to me, but there's somebody living in a place that's basically the size of a car parking space in Dublin. It's €240 a week, or is it €250 a week? One of the things, one of the listed features is a coat hook. In other words, this is considered, an advantage, a feature, and so on. So you're paying someone the size, and apparently it's just basically a bed, a lamp, and a coat hook, right? But you're paying €250 a week for that, right? So there are so many people, and we've gone down this road before, who are living in damp flats or living with mum and dad's back room when they're nearly
Yeah,
30 and
yeah,
all.
yeah.
You're getting educated now. Remember, you used to leave because you couldn't get a job and you had no academic qualifications. Now you're getting a degree to emigrate.
I sometimes wonder if, in fact, this isn't a deliberate policy of the government. Because by and large,
What do you mean by that?
by and large, as we know in the South, younger people are more likely to vote for the Shinners. And if they vote for the
Yeah,
Shinners, they're essentially voting for a united Ireland. I mean, that's what makes Sinn Féin what it is. Uh, and
yeah.
it's a fact that, I mean, Simon Harris, must keep an eye on the time here. Harris is
How
quoted
long
in
we
there
left, by the way?
about
How long we left?
a minute and a half. He says,
Yeah.
Simon Hirst during the campaign or later said, I let you into a little secret tonight on my Insta Live. I think we need to really phase out third level fees. And essentially he promised them that he would phase out third level fees, which of course
They've
hasn't.
increased them, Jude. And that was in 2024. They have increased them there recently
Yeah.
because there's the student grant. There was a grant to them. They've decreased that by 1,000. So in other words, they've increased the fees for the students by 1,000. It's
But this
far
is
from taking it down.
Yeah,
You
well, I
know.
like saying, that after they get the degree, they go for the airport and go off,
Yeah.
and maybe
Yeah.
that's the aim of the government. And I think if
Yeah.
that is, Sinn Féin and others should be really pointing that out loud and clear because a lot of people wouldn't see it that way. They just say it's a look at the draw. Okay, Pat,
Jude,
right time.
the immigration's become a big thing now, but it's not. No, they're going, to work
Um,
up to a Navy in New York. It's now these people are, architects and accountants, but they're
I,
heading off.
it's sort of bad because they'll not be back. If they
They'll
settle
not be back.
down
No.
good jobs, then they'll
Yeah.
not be back. Okay, Pat,
Yeah.
we
Well,
will
on
be
that note, Jude,
We'll be
good luck to
back.
you.
We will be
We will
back.
be back. We will. Somebody famous said that before. Bye, Jude.